مرحبا واهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. كمرشح رسم دونالد ترامب طريقه الخاص للفوز بالترشيح ثم البيت الأبيض، وكان مرشحا مختلفا من أي مرشح آخر في التاريخ الأمريكي، فلا ينبغي أن يفاجأ أحد بأنه في المكتب البيضاوي بدأ دونالد ترامب ولاياته بالفعل برسم طريقه الخاص المتفرد في توليه للرئاسة، بداية من خطاب تنسيبه مرورا باستخدامه المستمر لوسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، وصولا إلى حقيقة أنه 1% من الأمريكيين خرجوا في أول يوم عمل كامل لإدارته في مظاهرات حاشدة في أنحاء البلاد، ما يبدو معه جليا أن إدارة ترامب لن تشبه أي إدارة أخرى. ولكن من الناحية العملية، ماذا لنا أن نتوقع من رئيسنا الجديد؟ ما المؤشرات التي تدل عليها تعييناته لوزرائه؟ ماذا يمكن أن نتعلم من أول أوامر تنفيذية للرئيس؟ كيف تعكس قراراته المبكرة وعوده الانتخابية؟ وبعد مرور 100 يوم كيف ينبغي أن نقيس النجاح والفشل؟ لمناقشة السلة بين الشؤون السياسية والسياسة في الأيام الأولى لإدارة ترامب، يسرني أن أرحب باللجنة التي تضم خبيرينا البارزين ستيف كليمنز ونورم أورنستين. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Today, we're meeting with our panel of political experts to discuss the early days of President Donald J. Trump. We are in a new political world, gentlemen. Let's begin at the beginning. The inaugural address, a lot of people had consternation over America First, but millions of Americans were actually, this touched a chord for them. What is the meaning of America First? Why does it touch a chord with some people? Why doesn't it reflect that chord with others?
It touches a discord with a lot of people who know something about history and who know that in the 1930s, the term America First was a kind of pro-Nazi approach that Charles Lindbergh, who was a sympathizer, and others used. So it evokes some very dark things. But let's face it, if you're a populist, or if you're in an age now when you've seen disastrous wars like Iraq and Afghanistan as Americans see it, where you have stagnant wages, where there is this widespread sense that 25% of the federal budget goes to foreign aid when it's actually a little bit less than 1%, the idea that you're going to turn your focus to America, not get involved in adventurism abroad, a point, by the way, reinforced by Theresa May in her visit here in Washington,
the British
Prime Minister, who is now managing a very hard Brexit, as it were, and saying no more foreign adventurism. That resonates with a lot of people who don't understand that the term itself has dark connotations.
Yeah, but I think that for those that are using America First as a term, it doesn't go back to the Charles Lindbergh racist days. I think it goes back to this feeling that we used to talk about and joke about, that America fought the Cold War and China won. And that captures the sense that people feel that this role that they played of being a global guarantor, of serving multiple tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, that hasn't helped their lives improve when they go home to Kansas and to Oklahoma and to Texas, and they feel as if the northeastern liberal establishment has us all involved with problems abroad, all involved with problems overseas, and there's a fatigue about that because they think that our nation is being essentially ripped off by the rest of the world because their lives aren't improving. And so that I think is a more contemporary sense. It was interesting about the term America First. Donald Trump wasn't using that in the early parts of his campaign. It came about by way of a New York Times interview that David Sanger, a journalist, had done with him. And David was the one that says, everything you're saying sounds like America first. And then Donald Trump began using the term at that point.
Interesting.
But I would add to that, however, that the inaugural speech, it turns out, Trump said he wrote it himself. Then the campaign or the White House admitted that it was fundamentally written by Steve Bannon, who's his chief policy advisor, who was the chairman of Breitbart, a news organization that has played with anti-Semitic themes before. And so there is a darker side to this that may not resonate with the voters Steve is talking about, but it's there.
Beyond the focus on America first, I think the fundamental theme of the domestic side of the inaugural address was millions of Americans have been overlooked by, well, people like all of us, people, creatures of Washington, and they will be overlooked no more. Is that accurate? Is there something to this?
Well, one, it was a starkly populist speech, and it started with an attack on Washington. And I thought as I watched that the people sitting right behind him, the Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, the Republican Majority Leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, were a little uneasy because it was attacking them as well. But what we know is, one, 61% of those who voted in the exit polls believed that Donald Trump was not qualified to be president. And a whole lot of them voted for him. Why? Because they believe that Washington is so broken, is not listening to them, is in the pocket of all these other elites, part of which goes back to the bailout program for the financial institutions that most Americans thought stuck it to them while the bankers made out with millions or billions and bonuses, that you could blow the whole place up and it couldn't be any worse. And that speech played right into that sentiment.
You know, in my view, there are two Americas right now. This is not a common theme. So that to the America that is not living in urban cities and benefiting from technology and high wages and great opportunities and going to Ivy League schools, those words resonated as very real. And I think those of us in the media need to understand, and again, I reference this a lot, that I happen to have a family comes from that area of the world. I have a lot of cousins in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas who voted for Donald Trump and support him. And they are the classic story of people who served in the military, who came back and saw their jobs go to India and go to China and the Philippines and had very little there. And so when they heard the story that we're going to try and bring back manufacturing, we're going to try and get jobs, we're going to focus on you, and we're going to tip over the DC establishment. And remember, in 2008 and 2009, we had a massive global financial crisis rooted in structural corruption here in this town. And Donald Trump was elected to be a wrecking ball and just take down that establishment. And I think that's what we're seeing him do. And I think many of us that are part of the establishment here in Washington are shocked that he's actually doing what he said he would do. But it is very real for those people, for many of those people who supported him, even though I agree with Norm that there are a majority of people who feel that Donald Trump is not qualified to be president. But we're going to have to get beyond that, because he is president of the United States and he is responding to a public who is angry and hurt.
Now, one of those institutions that he's launched attacks on is the media. And it's been rather remarkable in the early days of the administration, we're only still in the very early days, to see this conflict with traditional media. What do you make of it? Why pick the media to have a major battle with on day one? And where do you think this is going to shake out?
There are multiple reasons for it. One is you want to discredit people who point out your corruption, your unhinged behavior, your lies. And we know that large numbers of people believe Trump and not what they see in front of their own eyes. So even after an enormous amount of evidence that his inaugural brought many, many fewer people than Barack Obama's 2 inaugurations, and that includes hard data from the subway system of the people who came down, pictures that showed the difference, a majority of Trump voters believe that he had the largest attendance ever. That's one reason. A second reason is if you go after the media, you hope you will cow them and make them frightened enough that they aren't going to report some of the things that you want. And a third reason is that Trump is so insecure and so narcissistic that when he sees these reports that may be accurate, he becomes furious that people are reporting things that he has come to believe himself, even if they're untrue, are actually accurate. So if you look at the attendance at the inaugural, he cannot get away from, a week later, despite the fact that he's won, even when he went to meet with his own Republicans in Congress, starting his talk not by discussing his agenda, but by complaining and by boasting that he'd had the largest attendance ever. And despite the fact that he lost the popular vote by 2% and that his electoral vote margin was 46th out of 58 presidential elections, every chance he gets in interviews or speeches, he starts by talking about how he had a historic victory greater than almost any in American history. So there are a lot of reasons, some of which are pretty disturbing.
Fringe news groups are back and are ascendant right now. Fringe news groups like Breitbart, of which Steve Bannon, whom Norm had mentioned, are in the ascendancy, and for them to maintain their leverage, they need to put more traditional and classic news media organizations on edge, I think, and divide them. And you see it going on right now where the media is having a debate internally on what to call a lie, what to call a falsehood, what to call alternative facts. He's making the media nervous about its own classic reporting role. And I think that is going to continue because those people who animated and put Donald Trump in office are not consumers of the Atlantic magazine or the New York Times or the Washington Post. So they are communities that Donald Trump can get positive ratings from his crowd by offending classic media.
I'm hearing you say that if we put aside the psychology part of it and the practical politics part of it, attacking the media and making it debate among itself and think about how it's going to report him is actually a reasonably sound strategy.
Well, look, he's going after two big groups, the intelligence agencies and the media. And these are the two institutions who can take him down. And he's sending big shots across the bow to both of these establishments.
We're going to take a break right now. We're going to come back and discuss the decision-making apparatus in the White House, how Donald Trump will make decisions affecting this 300 million Americans in just a moment. All right, gentlemen, let's take a look at the Trump White House. What sort of decision maker do you think this is he's going to be? Is he going to be chairman of the board? Is he going to be a CEO, a chief executive officer? What sort of model, when you look at the White House, do you think he's going to be setting up? Steve?
Well, right now, it's unlike any decision-making apparatus that we have seen in any political or any presidential administration. I'd be interested in Norm's thoughts on this. But what we see Donald Trump doing is, for those things he's interested in, he is the decision maker. He seems uninterested and not curious in alternative views, and he seems to sink his teeth into promulgating, to putting out exactly what he wants to do, exactly the way he wants it to be said by his people, whether that's Kellyanne Conway, whether it's followers like Newt Gingrich on TV, who went on TV and said that Donald Trump was no longer going to use the term draining the swamp, so to speak, and he was quickly told that that's not the case, and Newt Gingrich had to embarrass himself by going on TV and saying he had made a boo-boo, so to speak. You can explain that to our audience. But I think on these other issues, and we saw a classic case the other day where his spokesman, Sean Spicer, was essentially ordered by Donald Trump to go out and state a lie about the size of the audience, those that had gone to hear Donald Trump's inaugural address, who were on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And we had lots of evidence that what Sean Spicer said was inaccurate, but Donald Trump made him walk the plank and go out and say these things. So this is a man very engaged in what he wants to be engaged in. He's not engaged in other things. And so those people around him, like Rance Priebus, the chief of staff, and others, that there is a machinery there, which Steve Bannon, whom Norm had mentioned earlier, and others are involved in, and they are preparing executive orders, presidential memoranda, positions and possibly influencing tweets, which is how Donald Trump communicates where he really is on something. And they're helping to do that and to line it up and shove it in front of President Trump. And they're now doing something I've never seen before, is executive order signing. Remember, executive orders were controversial under President Obama. He resorted to more and more executive orders because Congress was not moving, not taking action on things. And Republicans pilloried President Obama for executive orders. But now Donald Trump doing much more has turned it into theater, where even on the readouts that we get on what Vice President Pence is going to be doing during his day, he says, I'm going to attend the White House to witness the signing of executive orders without saying what they are. It's become a national event, if you will. And that's a problem. So it's showing that Donald Trump is the monarch of the day, acting on impulse on those things he cares deeply about. That it's very unlike what we've seen before.
Okay.
So
Norm?
we know Politico magazine, a fairly prominent publication here in town, did a roundtable with the people who had done biographies of Trump, and people who'd spent an enormous amount of time with him, hundreds and hundreds of hours, mostly starting out with some sympathy. They said he's somebody who has almost no knowledge base, believes that his decisions are best when they're made from the gut without knowledge, has almost no attention span, and no impulse control. And we've seen a lot of that. Trump is not going to care about most of these policy issues, unlike most presidents. He is going to be like the non-executive chairman of the board. He will get involved when the deals have to be completed. He will have a few areas, including the wall in Mexico and immigration, where he's spoken out so much that he feels he has to be engaged. But Mike Pence, the vice president, who's from the radical wing of the Republican Party, will be the equivalent of the chief operating officer of the domestic branch. And it appears that Michael Flynn, the angry anti-Muslim national security advisor, will be in charge of much of the foreign policy, although that and the power struggle with General James Mattis, a 4-star to Flynn's 3-star, both retired now, but those matter, at the Defense Department, miles away, will still be a moderating influence. Pence has made most of the cabinet choices, not the Attorney General, not the Secretary of State, not the Secretary of Defense, but many of the others. And he's picked many members of Congress who are from the more radical end. Mick Mulvaney, perhaps the most right-wing in the House, to be the budget director. Tom Price, a very radical member, to be the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. And Pence is going to have a lot of sway over many of these areas of domestic policy that Trump fundamentally doesn't care about, along with the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who's also extremely conservative, who Trump has vilified frequently, but who now believes that the president will sign almost anything that Republicans in Congress put in front of him.
So we've already seen President Trump in his early days, as you said, make executive decisions on a wide range of issues. They've all essentially fulfilled campaign promises. Was there anything surprising, anything that you that he did that you didn't expect in his early decisions?
You know, surprising in terms of reversals of policy, no. So we're going to have, you know, Ronald Reagan used to say at times when he had disarray that in his White House the right hand didn't know what the far right hand was doing. And we may have some of that in the Trump White House. The other point is many of these executive orders were hastily drafted, and it turns out that they are going to backfire. They're in some cases illegal. They're going to have to do a lot of repair work.
The two for me, I appreciate where Norm is in this, but the two for me was the real surprise was being at his inauguration and listening to his speech, which was a very dark speech. But there was a point in it, got very little attention, where he raised up the promise of science and technology, and he really gave a tribute to science and technology and the progress that would be coming that was almost very Donald Trump-like, while at the same time we've seen in the administration a shutdown of climate science, and we have scientists and engineers in this country that are really worried about their place in the ecosystem of public policy. So there's another one of those tense points that I can't quite explain, but it was a surprise. The other is more disturbing, and that deals with a conversation that the German golfer Bernhard Langer apparently had with Donald Trump after hearing from one person who heard from another person. So several layers of hearsay that millions of Americans fraudulently voted in the United States election. And then Donald Trump's tenacity in bringing, in insisting that there was wide scale on the level of 5 million potential fraudulent votes in this past election, which everyone in all sides of the aisle is basically saying this is a dangerous track to go down, and insisting that there will be a major investigation and calling for that. And the reason I'm surprised by it is that it shows that even among Donald Trump's closest advisors, when he sinks his teeth into something that he strongly believes, a Sean Spicer, a Kellyanne Conway, a Steve Bannon, his own family can't get him to back off of it. That is a surprise. It's very disconcerting, but it tells us something about the man that we need to pay attention.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on
Thank
Dakhel,
you, Rob.
Washington. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول الأولويات السياسية لإدارة ترامب، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.